Welcome to Flying Upstream, the podcast where we uncover the choices, practices, and wisdom that defy mainstream conventions. I'm Kristyn.
And I'm Luisa. And together we're here to illuminate the alternative paths that have shaped human experiences through the ages. In each episode, we'll examine ways to move beyond societal norms. We're passionate about how timeless wisdom and unique lifestyle choices can foster healthier, sustainable, and enriching lives.
Welcome back, free spirits. In today's episode of Flying Upstream, we're diving deep into a topic that is in all the airways these days, a topic that can stir a bit of controversy. And of course, on the podcast that celebrates the controversial and the unconventional, we're covering the cutting edge techniques paired with a whole lot of inspiration.
That is right, beautiful listeners. Tonight, our guest is Jamie Toyne. Jamie was diagnosed with ADHD as a child and has burnt out 3 times in his career. Once as a professional tennis player, business owner. After researching the connection between ADHD, burnout, and flow, Jamie developed a coaching program called FlowJo, which helps ADHD founders to cure burnout, harness their ADHD superpowers, and flowing towards their goals. Jamie is also the author of Pressure Gauge Mindset and the founder of 2 other companies called Deal Flow and Exit Planner. He helps more than 400 entrepreneurs successfully exit their business. Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Luisa. Thank you, Kristyn.
So, Jamie, let's start at the beginning. How did ADHD impact your life as a kid growing up? What was that like?
It looked like me spending a lot of time on home suspension rather than in the classroom. So that was, I think probably more challenging for my mum than it was for me in many ways. So yeah, I think it was a bit tricky. The school sort of recommended that I go get checked out for ADHD, and lo and behold, the pediatrician said I did. Mum didn't want to medicate me with the pretty heavy drugs that early in life. And also, it was kind of taboo back then. It wasn't like so socially acceptable as it is in today's society. So we kind of kept that pretty hush-hush. So I continued to struggle through school. But one of the magical things about ADHD is you can really hyper-focus and really get into flow when you're doing things that you enjoy. And one of those things was sport, and specifically tennis. So I played lots and lots of tennis, and that was sort of my escape, where I could escape the chaos of my mind and enter a flow state where everything sort of calmed down, and I was sort of got out of my mind and into my body and was able to have fun and enjoy and listen to a coach. And it sort of counteracted a lot of those sort of beliefs that you develop as a young kid with ADHD, that you're a rat bag and you're undisciplined and disrespectful. So yeah, sport was really great for me.
So first of all, congratulations that you found something, because that's amazing. That's important. And second of all, as a former high school tennis player, yay for tennis. I love tennis. What I'm wondering as you're sharing that is, you talk about finding the flow state, but do you recall, like, how did you end up finding tennis? Because not all the kids, I know a lot of adults who struggle with ADHD too, and even them, they haven't found something that gets them to that flow state. What took you to the place where you found something and you realized that tennis got you in that state?
Well, I think I had there's different forms of ADHD. I probably have hyperactive and inattentive ADHD, but I mean, I just couldn't sit still. It's sort of like a dog that's really excited in the morning and hasn't been walked yet. You need to take them out to the oval and throw a ball and exhaust some of that energy. So sport was a common sense solution, I suppose. I think we all experience a lot more flow when we're younger and significantly less flow when we're older. I think as we gather more responsibility, also autonomy, we start to live a lot more of our lives in the past or the future, essentially, and we really struggle to be in the present moment. We're stressing about a lot of things, and we often tell ourselves that we're too busy to do the things that are flowy, or we feel like we can't make a living out of the things that truly make us flow.
I want to circle back to one thing. You mentioned tennis, and it seems like that's almost your superpower, right? So within ADHD, seems like there's a stigma associated with it, but you actually had this superpower that you were able to really hone in on and become successful, it sounds like, in tennis. And I'm wondering how that carried over to your entrepreneurial journey and if you employed a similar strategy with the focus. And you mentioned that there was burnout there. So, how did that all transpire?
Yeah, I'll walk you through the 3 burnouts because it's interesting when you said I had success with tennis and tennis was my superpower. I noticed my body just tighten up. I'm like, oh, that's not how I feel about my career at all because I was really enjoying tennis and I got better and better and I started to get sponsorships. And most of those sponsorships were really exciting because I got free equipment and free clothing. But one of the sponsorships I secured was more like an investor. So I was about 16 years old and this very wealthy man basically offered to pay for all of my travel expenses, training, everything, living expenses. So this alleviated a lot of financial pressure on my mum, who was a single mother, but it put a lot of pressure on me because the deal was that he would take a 10% cut of any prize money that I won. And at the level I was playing at, mostly juniors, a few open events at the time, he really wasn't going to see a return on that investment unless I cracked the top 50 in the world. And I was so far away from that. And so really in that moment, just going back to adults accumulating responsibility, that was a really key moment. And the tennis court stopped being this sanctuary where I could escape the chaos in my mind and really get into flow. And it actually became the place where I was in my head the most and the voices in my head became the loudest. And the other really challenging thing around the age of 16 is that I dropped out of school to play on the pro circuit full time. And so I had to do my study by correspondence. So I escaped the sort of classroom environment of punishment and reward that I really struggled with. But I then became the person holding the stick and carrot that had to basically manage myself. And it was really that relationship between the part of myself that set the strategy and the vision and was responsible for disciplining or rewarding what I refer to as my lower self, the kid who actually had to jump onto the tennis court and compete and train and look after his diet and sit down and do his homework. And, it was really a breakdown of that relationship between these two parts of myself, the expectation and the goals of, reaching the top of the mountain, and then the actual step-by-step journey of doing that. My higher self had absolutely no compassion for my lower self. It didn't matter how many matches I won or how hard I tried. This goes to growth mindset and stuff, but I really struggled and something snapped inside of me and I threw a tantrum one day and quit the sport forever. And so a similar thing happened. I went to business school and then I started sort of building and acquiring businesses of my own. I grew up in a very small town in the middle of Australia. I was living in San Francisco at this point. I had a successful company that was headquartered there and I relocated to Mexico to learn to surf and speak Spanish. And for a kid that grew up in this tiny town in the middle of the desert, like thousands of miles away from the ocean, I'd kind of reached the top of my mountain. I had financial security, if not almost financial freedom. And I burnt out again. And that was really surprising to me. But I took 6 months off. I moved back to the small town that I grew up in and moved back in with my mum. And I eventually, after 6 months of recovering from the burnout, I sold that company. I was completely done with it. And that was the point that I sort of started going, is there a connection between my ADHD and burning out? Why do I keep burning out? And so I became really obsessed with flow because I was like, what's the opposite experience of burnout? And how do I sort of like harness my potential and like when am I feeling my best? And it's when I'm in flow. And so it became my mission to unlock flow. And so I got really obsessed with a lot of the biohacking and basically hacking my mindset and my biology to unlock these flow states. And it was really helpful. I did this for about 2 years and I launched another company. I published my first book. So I was, again, being quite productive and I thought I was doing okay. But like 2 or 3 years later, I burnt out again, just as I was about to launch my first software company. It was that point that I was like, okay, there's something in flow, but I'm not approaching it right. What I realized is the way that we talk about flow in the West is very much synonymous with peak performance. And we can only access a flow state for up to 4 hours a day on a regular basis. And so I started skimming through the history of flow, and there's different words for it. The ancient Greeks called it, and the Taoist monks, called it Wu Wei, and the Zen monks called it Zazen. People have called it different things. And in the East, they really look at flow a lot more holistically. It's not just about peak performance, but it's about life flowing and synchronicity and going with the flow. It was actually, I read this amazing poem by Portia Nelson that made me question how I was approaching reaching the top of my mountain. It really just became about trying to enjoy the process of achieving my goals rather than having to use the stick and carrot to will myself up the mountain.
Thank you for sharing about the burnout, because I think it's important for listeners and for people to understand that there is beauty in the process. We tend to forget that. We just want to reach that mountain. We just want to reach that destination. But in my own personal experience, all of the beauty that has come with me, that moment of reaching it, has happened in the process, in the lessons, in the people, in just the experiences that teach us so much to take away from it. So you started some companies. You've been successful in so many different ways, and I hope I'm not making your body have a reaction right now. I know that we started talking about ADHD and the impact of that in your childhood, but throughout all of this process and learning about flow, how has flow impacted your ADHD?
Sure. So the connection between flow and ADHD is really interesting, because I would say that when I'm engaged in something that is misaligned, either with my values or my passions or my interests or my strengths, it's impossible for me to get into flow. And it probably is for most people, but I have an allergic reaction to it. I really just cannot sit still. I just can't do it. And so that was really difficult at school. And it was really difficult when I would build my companies in a way where I created a job for myself that I didn't like, or my higher self created so much pressure and unrealistic expectations around what I could achieve in a given day, week, or month, that there was too much pressure there. The magical thing about, being neurodivergent is that we're actually amazing at getting into flow states, really deep flow states, and for extended periods of time when we're doing things that are aligned with our interests, passions, and purpose. And so I sort of went from ADHD as this neurodevelopmental disorder that I need to manage, and became my superpower, where if it didn't energetically align with me, it just wasn't for me, and I just needed to get better at filtering out. And that's really the philosophy that underpins the way that I work with ADHD creatives and founders as well, is really challenging them to realign their lives to their true nature, I would say. And that's how they can sort of harness their superpower.
I want to draw attention to what about your story in particular is so unconventional, because we're really all about highlighting that in our podcast. What I'm hearing is that you had success, I say in quotes, because you had successful companies. You were a very, very good tennis player, being sponsored, getting all kinds of free stuff. Many people would define that as successful. You had lots of money, you had whatever, you could just take a 6-month vacation anytime. Lots of people would define that as success. But like you said, it was not really aligned with your core values, and that was preventing you to get into your own personal flow state. So even though society was telling you, hey, you need to make a lot of money, you need to do a good job in school, that was not working for you. And so to your credit, you were actually able to break the cycle, right? Finally, you said, okay, I can't do this anymore. I need to step back, really do some serious self-reflection and figure out how this can work for me and how I can actually be happy. And that is what I think is so inspiring. I have my own story too, where I was working at a tech startup here in San Francisco, and they let my entire department go. And I just thought to myself, I cannot do this again. I cannot go through the interview process and be judged and evaluated only to be at a company that is not loyal, working so hard to make someone else money. I just can't do it anymore. And I knew to my very core it was just not an option. It was just not an option. And I'm telling my friends and my family, yeah, I'm not going to find another job. They're like, Kristyn, you've lost it. But it's that same moment where you're like, I literally cannot do this, right? Cannot go back and live that previous life. You've just hit that point. So I want to dig a bit into that moment for you, Jamie, that moment when you decided you cannot go back to that previous life of the startups in the same way that you were. And how were you able to flip things or reflect on your superpower and your strengths to lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, I like to use the analogy of a river, that represents flow. So when a river is flowing and you're going along with river, you're flowing towards your destination, and it's not like an uphill battle. It's kind of flowy and cruisy. And the things that block us from flow and bring us out of alignment, they're like the boulders in our river. And if you allow them to stack up over time, then your river stops to a trickle and eventually stops altogether. And that's really when you experience burnout. And so really my focus was about removing those boulders and realigning everything in my life so that everything I interact with, relationships, the way that my business was structured, the hours that I worked, everything sort of evolved around my values and my passions and my strengths. And I'll give you some practical examples in a moment, but I think that these boulders can really represent anything. That's really what I try to focus on rather than adding things. I think that was the thing I used to do. I used to try and add. When I became obsessed with flow, I'd be doing cold plunges and saunas, and these things are all great. Meditation, breath work, they all work, but they're like the symptoms. We do this all the time in the West. We focus on the symptoms rather than the underlying cause. And the underlying cause is usually the boulders. It might be a business partner that you're misaligned with, or in some cases, it may be that the business that you've started is actually it's not the customer that you want to serve anymore. That's really my approach. I've helped many entrepreneurs exit their business, and a lot of them achieve financial freedom. And their narrative was that once they achieved financial freedom, then they would be happy. But the 4 to 6 to 8 years prior, they were mostly miserable. And that led to a breakdown in relationship, not only with themselves, but really important people in their life. And they were so focused on getting to the finish line that when they got there, they realized that actually wasn't what they were striving for. What they were striving for was happiness, fulfillment, these ways of being, I suppose. And it's really interesting in your story, Kristyn, the way that I was hearing it, it's like there's like mind intelligence and body intelligence. And I think flow is body intelligence. That's when the mind almost goes quiet. Your body's like this perfect machine that's been built over tens of thousands of years. And I feel like our mind has a lot of malfunctions and dysfunctions, and we have limiting beliefs that are created from when we're younger. We have trauma, we have societal pressure telling us that we should do things. So when you got to a point where you were made redundant, it sounds like your body just physically couldn't bear the thought of doing that again. And you were able to listen to your body intelligence rather than listening to the anxious ping dog that is the mind saying, you need financial security, you need to get another job, these things so it's really hard to pay attention to that body intelligence. But that's also a really key component of being able to identify what you need to realign and accessing flow.
I want to just continue right down that path and ask you, what techniques would you recommend for people, especially entrepreneurs, to be able to start working through those boulders? How do you in your own coaching program walk someone through that?
Yeah, there's a bunch of techniques, but again, the main thing is really identifying what is your true nature, because I think a lot of that's probably the hardest part to start with, is to figure out, like, what is my true nature? What are the things that really energize me? And if you can tap into that body intelligence, it's very easy, because when you have a conversation with someone, you're putting energy into that conversation. Is that energy flowing back to you, or is it flowing out? Is it leaking? Is it zapping your energy? Do you feel drained? When I sit down to do a certain task on the computer, or even sitting behind the computer, do I feel energized or drained? And so it's really starting to tap into energy systems in the body, I would say, is the first thing. And then the second thing is really just doing an audit of everything that you interact with, the ecosystem that is your life, and identifying what is out of alignment. And I think people really struggle to be honest about what is out of alignment, because it could be 10-year relationship, or it could be the fact that you've spent $30,000 relocating to a new city that's just not actually where you want to live, or you've spent 4 years building a company that you actually don't want to do anymore. And often it's not necessarily about these big drastic removals of the boulders. Sometimes it can just be addressing them, like having a difficult conversation with a business partner and saying, hey, I'm not really happy with the direction of where things are going, or deciding that it was great to have investors, but actually you don't like you don't want to work with those investors anymore, and figuring out a way to buy them out or get some other investors to buy them out. So yeah, I think they're the overall principles. I mean, there's lots of things, obviously working with ADHDers and people with burnout, there's lots of interventions and exercises that we do to restructure their lives and their business. To reduce cognitive load is a really big one, and to be able to get a little bit more traction. I'd say the other really big piece is helping them improve the relationship between the different parts of themselves. I mentioned that, like, higher self and lower self, the one holding the stick and carrot versus the one actually having to do the work. And that's a really hard one, particularly for ambitious people, and particularly for people that have self-led practices, whether you're an entrepreneur or a creative. You're having to manage yourself. And often a lot of people that leave the workforce to work for themselves, it's usually because they don't want to work for a boss anymore. And particularly for neurodivergence, those systems don't allow them to harness their sort of full potential. But the problem with working for yourself is that you are your own boss, and often we are the nastiest of all the bosses. Like, we don't give ourselves holidays, we don't pat ourselves on the back, we don't celebrate our wins, and we often set ourselves up for failure, having like 16 hours worth of work to do on a Monday when we've only got 7 hours allotted to do it. And so really starting to build traction by actually setting realistic goals and hitting them, structuring your day in a way that's consistent with the flow cycle, like your individual biology and your meridian cycles and all of that stuff as well.
Jamie, you've talked a lot about the obstacles that you have had to overcome, and now you've just mentioned some tips for getting into that flow state as an entrepreneur. I'm curious how community has played a role in supporting you along your journey, whether online or in person, and how critical you think that component is.
Yeah, that's a really good question. In massive ways and in myriad ways. One would be body doubling. Like, actually, like for me as a person with ADHD, it's really hard for whatever reason to sit down by myself in a room and focus. I get distracted really easily, and having the physical presence of someone else, and if not physical, online, I'm able to focus more. So that's the way I have in my cohort. We have body doubling, and I'm part of some other groups as well. Connecting with other, creatives and entrepreneurs that are passionate about the same things and trying to do the same things, like being parts of mastermind groups and things like that is super, super helpful. I was raised in a pretty loving community in this small little town, and I was blessed with a really incredible mother that she was a social worker. She sort of understood my neurodivergence to an extent where she gave me a lot of freedom to do things my way, including dropping out of school, which was probably pretty scary for her, considering how much I struggled at school. But yeah, I think like I really reflect a lot on the way I was raised by my mom and how that sort of allowed me to build those skills of like, gave me the freedom to build my life to suit me in a way. And I think that's probably a little bit rare. I would say a lot of adults have to learn that themselves as they get older, but I sort of feel like I had that permission quite early in life, which I feel really, really privileged and blessed for.
That is quite the blessing. As a mother to a 17-year-old, I do agree that you had an amazing mother. I can imagine that that's a really hard position to be in, but it sounds like she obviously knew what was best for you. As we start to wind down, we have a couple more questions, but I want to hear a little bit about your book, because we know that you're an author. You wrote Pressure Gauge Mindset, and I'd love to hear a little bit about it. I'd love our audience to understand what that's all about.
Yeah, sure. So that's really talking about how to build a sellable company and prepare your business for exit, essentially. So I published that obviously when I had a mergers and acquisitions company, and it's just a compilation of experiences I'd had sort of putting these deals together and building these really intimate relationships with clients over 6 months to 12 months while they went through the journey of preparing their business for sale and exiting. And I stayed in touch with a lot of those clients that became friends afterwards, and just putting that all into a book that sort of essentially is a step-by-step guide to setting up your business in a way that you don't leave a lot of money on the table. A lot of entrepreneurs reinvest a lot of the profits back into the business and don't pay themselves very generously. And the exit is really, really important to a lot of people.
I'm also curious to know a bit of strategies for yourself, of how you keep yourself in check along the way. And how do you prevent yourself from slipping back into old patterns that you know are toxic for yourself and just don't work?
Yeah, I built a diagnostic tool originally for myself that measures my burnout versus FlowJo, which is the word I came up with to describe the more holistic version of FlowJo. So that's just a series of questions. My clients go through that every week or two. And then I have a more granular sort of, I guess you'd call it like a performance tracking sheet, but it's basically like a list of all the sorts of habits and the habits I want to do, the feelings I want to have. Feelings are really important. How do I feel about my week? Do I feel proud about what I've achieved this week? Those sorts of things. And I track that every week. So every Friday, FlowJo Friday, I'll sit down for about half an hour and go through that. And that keeps me pretty on track.
That's pretty amazing. I feel like so many people could benefit from that. Being able to understand what you want to feel and coming back to reflect on it at least once a week. I feel like that's life-changing. Even for people without ADHD, I think about myself and the amazing impact that could have on my life. You've honestly built some amazing tools. You've obviously had, we keep saying a lot of successes. And I'm really excited to hear, what are your long-term goals for your businesses and for your coaching program and for yourself and even your personal life?
Yeah, sure. For the coaching, I think I just want to work with more people, and specifically with people that inspire me. It's a real privilege to, I think actually, if I look at my whole career as being a business broker as well, just being able to build intimate relationships with people and get like a really intimate sort of front row seat to their business and also their personal lives. So it's a real privilege. So yeah, I think my professional goals is really just to focus on the coaching and expand that and continue to work with amazing people. Personal life, I've just moved back to Australia. So I've been mostly living overseas for the last 10 years in North America and Europe. And I've just settled back here in a place on the east coast of Australia in a small sort of village amongst a cluster of villages by the ocean where I can surf every day. I'm sort of in a phase of wanting to nest a little bit more and have a home base. The dream is to have a second home base in the Northern Hemisphere because a lot of my clients are there and it's tricky with time zones at times. And I just love traveling. And yeah, I think probably to have a family and do some of those things as well.
Sounds like amazing goals, and we wish you all the best and all the luck in the world. We're so grateful to have you on with us today, Jamie, and share your inspiring story. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course, this has been an amazing.
And to all our free spirits out there, thank you so much for joining us today. And don't forget to subscribe and follow, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right, free spirits, that's all the time we have for today on Flying Upstream.
We hope this episode sparked your curiosity and ignited a desire to explore the extraordinary paths less traveled.
Even when the current feels strong, a whole world of possibilities awaits.
We'll see you next time on the other side of mainstream.
So keep questioning, keep challenging, and most importantly, keep flying upstream.